First off, thank you everybody, both presenters and attendees for joining us. We really greatly appreciate all of your efforts and being part of the community. Thanks again. Also, of course, we hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during these unique times. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to get started. This session is a little bit longer, and however, it is a condensed version of a presentation we did recently on the 5.1 release, but I've added some additional slides here to put things in context, and we'll also spend some time looking at some of the futures as well, some of the investment areas. And despite everything that's going on in the world, we're investing very heavily, both in features that you're aware of, that you're using, as well as a number of others that are on the way, things that are kind of being built and prepared in parallel based on your needs, your requests, and then maybe leapfrogging a little bit over with some additional capabilities coming soon. Okay, it's also been great today to hear from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds. We've heard from IT, we've heard from R&D, we've heard from product development. That's been really helpful. And I'm also going to avoid using PowerPoint directly. I'm using it from the browser, so we should avoid some of the screen sharing issues that I am normally the one that has to walk through. Okay, again, this is Sean Palis at ProSymmetry. I might have met a number of you. We might have worked together. My contact information is here if you have any questions after the presentation. I'm also going to make the slides available as well. I'll jump between both the live instance or instances of Tempus as well as the slide deck, and might use some Excel files that are also open in the browser to convey some of the new capabilities of 5.1. So unlike the past presentations, we'll actually get into the product a bit now and take a look at some of the new capabilities. 5.1 is a big upgrade. There's been a huge number of enhancements. Again, everything is voice of customer driven. So hopefully you like what you're going to see today. All right, so with that being said, let's move forward. And what I want to focus on first is obviously what we do, which is resource management, resource portfolio management, and a number of enhancements here. And additional and subsequent slides will further highlight those investment areas. So two really big ones here. Again, I'll abbreviate some of these. I won't go into every specific item with demos. I'm certainly capable of doing that, or willing to if you like. We have two big ones. Number one is skills matrix, and number two is global replacement. Now, there's a whole host of security functionality behind the scenes supporting this, so we can choose who can do what, especially on the side of the skills matrix, but also on this global replace functionality. Now, if we just think in terms of how we've constructed capabilities around our resource pools inside of Tempus, we've always had and continue to have this attribution functionality where we can define various skills, roles, departments. I think we support something like 15 or 16 or so different data types. And then, of course, we've had time, phase, capacity, and calendars, and administrative time, and all the things needed to draw those shale, mountain, stack bar charts, identify through heat maps, over and under allocations. And we've had, to a certain extent, the ability to manage skills, but really not to the point where we were fully addressing what was being requested of, which was more continuum-driven, high, medium, low, 1 through 5, the various ways and flavors that organizations track and manage skills. So this is a new dimension that we've added inside of Tempus. So we've added the ability to set and manage skills, and you can define these a number of different ways. We'll take a look at this. We've added security to allow you to set up how users would actually manipulate the skills data. Is it going to be the command and control approach where managers will specify what your skill values are? Or is it going to be more democratic where end users can go in the system and say, I am a level 5 in .NET development. I'm a level 3 in contract negotiation, whatever those might be. Or is it somewhere in between where we have a mixture of end users setting those values and managers setting those values? So we put into place all the security required to do that. And then we've also added reporting. So we've added reporting capabilities to identify where we have skill deficiencies, skills or skills adequacies. And again, all this available directly inside of Tempus and all fully secured. You'll see over the life of the product going forward, the skills matrix functionality will play a bigger and bigger role in a number of other features, as you can imagine. Okay, so let's quickly jump into an instance of Tempus. This is just a demo environment that's fairly well configured to illuminate some of these features. And I'll skip drilling into the security settings since we've covered that previously, and I can certainly distribute notes on this separately. But again, both global role and resource roles for your security rules have been updated to allow for access to edit and or view the skills matrix information. Now, if we quickly take a look at our admin settings, And we'll first browse to our skill categories. You'll notice there's a new tile here in the center of the screen under the miscellaneous section, which has grown quite considerably over the years. We now have a screen from which we can create, update, and delete the various skills matrix categories. Now, the way this works is you would effectively specify the categories. So think of this like a grouping of the various skills you wish to list. And for those skills or questions or assessments or certifications, whatever you're tracking here, you will choose the unit of measure. Essentially, how are you measuring the skill? Is it a range of 1 to 5? Is it Boolean, yes or no? Is it a category, low, medium, or high? Or is it more advanced where we say essentially level of proficiency? Is it low, basic, demonstrating, proficient, and so on? Over time, we may add to this, but these tended to be the most common mechanisms for measuring this information across our clients and those that are interested in adding this functionality. Right? Okay, so we can set these things up. Now this all flows through into the resources. So now if we browse back to our resource management screen, for any resource, go ahead and open a resource. Let's open Lucas. You'll notice now underneath the resource profile, there's a new option for skills matrix. So now when I select the skills matrix, this will load the skills matrix categories for this individual resource. And from here, I can choose whether I have read, write, access level to apply the various skill values. So here's the case of security awareness training, yes or no. Education levels, yes or no. You can see this, we have a slider type control for a continuum of 1 to 5. We can set our level of proficiency against any of these values, which again are fully configurable by you. There's a case for solution level. So project development, is the user low, basic, demonstrating, proficient, expert. So again, we can configure all these various skills matrix categories, allow the end user or managers or others to set these values. And then all this information will flow through. In one particular case where I can display that would be on our reports. Let's go ahead and leave without saving. And there's a built-in new report that we've added. So this is accessible underneath all, and that's here, skills matrix reporting. And when I launch this report, this will return all the resources I'm able to access. You can see the various skills matrix values and categories listed, transposed along the top. You can choose which categories of skills you wish to incorporate. You can filter by various resource attributes. You'll notice up in the far left, options to export to Excel and or PDF. And then of course, there's the heat map. Now the heat map uses logic to identify from green to yellow to red adequacy or inadequacy of any particular skill. So red is where we have issues. Green is where we're essentially proficient or well-staffed according to these various skills. We've also added inside of this report additional flexibility that allows an end user to insert additional resource-centric attributes. So if I wanted to filter but then gain additional insight into the various departments or employment basis for these resources, perhaps I'm most interested in filtering by a particular department and looking at the resources in this particular fashion. So I can see department, accounting, and finance and the resources therein. So again, a lot of flexibility here, but ultimately a roll-up of all the skills-related information. So this is a pretty big add to the product. We're excited to bring it, and there'll be a lot of new stuff that will follow onto this as we move forward in the product's lifecycle. So skills matrix. We jump back to the release notes here, or the release document that I'm using, this PowerPoint. The second major feature add along resource management that we've incorporated, and let me skip ahead here, is this global replace function. I added a slide here relative to our past discussion of the 5.1 release notes to really call out the importance of this feature. This is massively valuable, massively important for those of you that have worked in whether it's Excel or some other spreadsheet type of environment, or really any PPM tool. I remember when I was with Microsoft for a number of years, leading their PPM tool set in essentially the Midwest. This type of capability was something you never even thought of addressing. There's no way to do it. Tempus now does this with one click, or maybe 2 or 3 clicks for that matter. So what this allows us to do is, in the event that someone is leaving the company, perhaps it's a furlough, a reduction in headcount, someone decides to retire, they quit, who knows? You can insert whatever possible reason. Well, that resource is likely, in the simplest case, allocated to at least one project, but likely dozens, tens, who knows how many projects. Some environments, it could be hundreds. Well, imagine having to go to each project and perform a replacement. It's an exceptionally messy and painful activity, regardless of tool. I mean, we've seen and we're very familiar with pretty much everything that's out there. And every one of them really requires you to go project by project to make the adjustment, which again may require having additional rights, introducing additional resources to this process. It might be bringing the PMs in, program managers. In any case, it's a mess. And because really what we're trying to do is take from a particular point in time forward. We don't want to address or adjust historical information, historical plan, historical actuals. We want to say from this point forward, wherever that resource is allocated, we want to conduct a swap. We want to remove that resource and instead introduce a different resource, perhaps another named individual, perhaps a generic placeholder demand planning resource, or more commonly something like a to be hired or an open requisition. Perhaps you're getting something synced from from like a Workday or something showing you we have an open rec for this particular position. Well, inside of Tempus with 5.1, we now have this global release function. And you can see here on the screen, this green resource and then a red resource. Wherever this green resource is assigned, notice time n. At time n plus 1, we essentially do this operation that replaces that resource across the entire portfolio. So massively powerful functionality here, especially as you start to, and this might not be apparent when you're just rolling this type of solution out, or when you're going through an evaluation of a tool. It's really when you get into it and you're maybe 3, 6, 9, 12 months in or more, you go, okay, one really important real world capability I need is to go in and do this bulk replace. Otherwise, this becomes massively manual and a lot of effort to get this done and do it correctly. Now, inside of Tempus and 5.1, let me show you this, and I won't show you the security, but there are a number of simplifying security standards we put in place. So you don't have to go in and add entitlements or rights to every project to perform this. There's sort of like an elevated level global permission that allows this to take place. But we do recognize this will likely be limited to sort of the tool owner, tool administrator, or perhaps more senior level folks in context of the application's ownership and maintenance. So inside of the resource management screen, there's a new icon, which you'll see if you have rights to it. It looks like a little person with a little arrow next to it. And let's pick on, how about Sam King? All right. Now on Sam King, when I select this resource replace, global replace function, it's going to tell me I'm replacing Sam King. I can now choose from the pool any resource I want to use to conduct the replacement. Again, these could be the demand planning resources, other names, or to be hired resources. So in this case, let's say we're going to replace Sam with a generic resource technology manager. I can choose the effective date. So at what point in time going forward, so from a time phase perspective, where do I want to start and then go into the future wherever there's assignments or allocation data or demand data for Sam King. So I choose my effective date. I then choose which data sets I wish to conduct the replacement on. Now, most of you are likely using allocation. Others may also be introducing or utilizing demand. So you can freely turn these on or off. And while it's highly unlikely you would ever use actuals, meaning moving the actuals, since again, the actuals should be applied to whoever originally put them in, we did add this option, again, because we kind of see and hear everything, even some things that maybe we don't agree with, but we did add that flexibility. So a user can now transition both the planned allocation, planned demand, as well as the actuals if necessary with one click. So we would input these parameters and then select save, and this would now fire across the entire system. So global replace functionality, massively useful post implementation. Okay. So following on with our investment in a number of resource management centric enhancements, there are a number of updates to the resource request workflow. This is another set of functions, again, intricately tied to the resource portfolio management aspect of the product. And all of these, again, are driven through requests by our customers. So just a handful of them here. Number one, we've now enabled multi-resource managers. In the past, you had a one-to-one association. Sean's manager might be Greg, but if making a request, perhaps there might be multiple managers involved. And we see that more frequently in cases of demand planning resources. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. We've also introduced assignment attribute display inside of requests. So in the past, you could provide, and the system did provide, the project name, the resource, the assignment, and other information around the data set and time frame. What it didn't pass through were any additional details. Perhaps there's specific notes, skills you're requesting, security clearances, knowledge areas, whatever it might be, additional detail that you might want us to supply the approving resource managers with in order for them to make a better decision. I think most commonly what we would see here, or what we will see, is just simply notes, additional details where someone can put in place some text to say, I worked with this person in the past, I think they would be great, but I'm open to this, and here's why. So maybe just some basic, a basic paragraph or so around what might be necessary. Right, so we'll take a look at that in a minute. We've also introduced a new approval modality. So the existing method still exists, where approvals can be triggered off of any change, just new requests, or threshold-based changes, percentage or work value. But we've added an intermediate approval step called trigger mode. This mode is designed to allow an organization to do their planning and then have a separate individual determine when the workflow actually fires. An example of this might be the initial estimates are performed by a business analyst, but a more senior level project manager or program manager or SME or whomever is then responsible to say, okay, this looks good, now let's send it forward to managers for review and approval. So it gives you an additional checkpoint in this process before the workflow actually initiates. And what happens is when you set this up, you are allowed to use any Boolean assignment custom field of your choosing. So if you wanted to create a field called release for approval or PM approval authorized or something like that, once that's in place and configured, once that value is set, the workflow then would actually initiate. We've also updated some of the approval related fields. So obviously in the past, when we had a one-to-one association, the resource manager was always going to be that resource manager. But now that we have a multi-resource manager capability, whoever actually processes or responds to a resource request could be any one of those resource managers. And if someone has 2, 3, 4, 5 different resource managers, whether that's a named person or a generic demand planning resource, we have to be able to accommodate that. So you'll find both in reporting and in the resource request workflow screens, the introduction of this quote unquote processed by field. All right, so a few changes there. Now, again, before I jump into the actual product to show you some of these things, I will quickly show some slides to illuminate what these mean. So for those of you that are really acclimated in the use of the resource request workflow, this will be pretty straightforward. For those of you that are not, I think this is a good way to put in context what we've added. So we have, of course, the 2 different data sets. Now, again, most of you are likely using just one, but you could also rename them. So whether it's allocation or demand, we can fire our resource request workflows off of either one of them or both. And these would flow through, and normally I would show this would be animation, but again, with sharing PowerPoint, there's always those risks, and I'll avoid it. Those would flow through to the resource manager, who can approve, reject, delegate, or provide a negotiated response back to the requester. Right? And there's lots of control along the way. This really big add here is this validation step. You'll see it set as optional, but this allows an intermediate individual, someone to play a role in determining what you are requesting. Is that accurate? Does it need a sanity check? Should we release this? Are we going to embarrass ourselves? This is going to get immediately rejected. Let's take a look at it before we now say, okay, ready to go. And then it can be fired. So this trigger mode is really a validation step in between the requester and the approving or approving managers. All right. Secondly, and I would argue this one's even more important, it applies to a much, much larger number of clients globally, is this multi-resource manager capability. So in the past, we had a one-to-one association, but you can notice the titles that I used here. These are pretty loosely defined, but it underscores a situation we see quite commonly, which is, we see this a lot in R&D, where this functionality is used very heavily, although it's also widely used elsewhere, is you might be requesting a particular skill or role or type of resource. And in past discussions, I've used this concept of a research analyst. And I know that's hideously vague, but insert really whatever skill you'd like. And imagine you have research analysts being managed by and available in 4 different regions. And the regions I have here are USA, Germany, India, and Singapore. So we have 4 facilities where we have these research analysts. In the past, you would have to essentially create a one-to-one pairing. You'd have to have a research analyst USA, research analyst Germany, and so on, and make that request. So you'd have to very clearly spell out what you would need, which really would kind of tie your hands a bit as a requester, because you don't care if the research is done. And there could be cases, though, where the research has to be done in the US or has to be done in a certain region, fine. But in general, generically speaking, you don't care if it's done in the US, in Germany, India, or Singapore. Well, that's what this capability will now do. If you imagine a sort of a Venn diagram of an overlap with this green resource being sort of in the dead center of it, we can have multiple resource managers tied to, for example, a research analyst generic demand planning resource. So when you make the request, you don't have to specify where that resource is. Now, you still may do that, but again, generically, you might say, I need a research analyst. And then at that point, all 4 of those managers get access to that request. So now you formed a marketplace where all 4 managers can look at this, and they may have conversations offline separately. There might be some back and forth with the PM or requester, but ultimately, whoever has capacity, whoever acts first on this request, gets to take ownership of it. So if a resource manager for research analysts in India, maybe I shouldn't have picked those words, but it's kind of a tongue twister, but if the India manager says, okay, I've got that person, they can immediately satisfy that request with one of their research analysts, and away we go. Whereas again, in the past, you had to, as a requester, make the decision ahead of time of where that resource had to be. So this now massively expands the flexibility of this marketplace and how we can now interact with resource managers. Okay, so let's jump into Tempus, and we'll go to a few different places. So, and perfect, I'm on the resource management screen. And again, this is going to contain a list of all of our resources. What you'll notice now, and I've already inserted ahead of time to save a few seconds here, is this resource manager column. Again, this was previously a single value selection field. And the members of this list are those where the is resource manager is set to true. That hasn't changed. Notice now when we define the resource manager for any particular resource, we can specify not just a single, but now you'll notice this multi-selection option where I can choose multiple resource managers. Right? So this is going to massively expand the flexibility of those using the resource request workflow. Now, a second example I'd like to walk you through is the actual use of the resource request workflow. So for this, let's go to project management and let's spin up a new project. So we'll say create project. We will call this resource request workflow demo 5.1 test. Okay. I've created like a million of these, so I want to make sure the name is unique. Next, we'll go to the allocation tab. We'll specify our time frame. It's going to be a June until maybe the end of the year type of decision. So say to the end of the year. In this case, what we'll do is create some. In this again, you don't have to use tasks, but I'm going to do one in this case. Let's say there's phase 1, and then for phase 1, we're going to assign a particular resource. So in this case, let me select Allison, who I know is set to have approvals. And I can also, at this point, insert my assignment attribute data, but let's first put in our request. So let's say we're going to need 40 hours per month, drag this across, and then maybe specify an assignment attribute here. So I might say that the assignment status is active, the priority is high, everything's high. Here are some notes. Please do what I say, and I can't spell. So obviously you can put in whatever notes you'd like around the request. Maybe there might be skills you're looking for, skills 1 or skill 2 and skill 3, and we'll skip this for now. We'll come back and talk about that in a moment. Now in this case, I'm requesting a named person, but normally these notes might be more helpful against a demand planning resource. But in any case, we'll go ahead and hit save, and then we will create. Okay. So this is now going to fire that resource request. Notice again our indicator. This is a pending request. And what I'll do is I'm going to log out and log back in as an approving manager. So let's log out and log in as Sean. All right, so there we go. We've got a new resource request here. When we browse to it, of course, you'll see our one pending request. So no changes here. There's some changes coming to this grid in the next release. We'll talk about at the end of the presentation. They're going to be quite helpful. Now, when I drill down into the request, a few changes here. Notice we now have access to the assignment attributes. So now as the approving manager, I can see, it looks like, maybe did I not set the values? Okay, well, those didn't come through. I could have picked the wrong things there, my apologies. So we would see those notes and other details for that particular request. I might have not saved, my bad. So again, you would see the assignment attributes flowing through with that particular request, and then could take action accordingly, right? Now from that same grid, if we jump back, you'll also notice this is one of the grids from which we will see those processed by fields. So those will now make their place here. So there's processed by would be displayed as opposed to the resource manager name. And then the other feature that I wanted to show was that approval process that includes that trigger mode. So if we go back to admin settings here, and I'll just quickly take you to it. We won't walk through the entire thing, but I'll quickly show you under general settings, and we go to resource request. Notice now we have two new modes at the bottom of the screen for the allocation data set and for the demand data set. One of them, or excuse me, they're both this trigger mode, which you can enable on both data sets, neither one or the other. And if you turn this on, it's going to keep the existing settings in place around your approval strategy. But when this is enabled, I can now choose from, okay, we can now choose from any of our assignment-centric Boolean fields. So if I now choose, I have one field here called release for approval. This is a Boolean assignment level field. And we save, the workflow will now essentially remain in a pending state, any new submission, until the associated assignment Boolean field is set to true. So this trigger mode enables a wider array of scenarios, greater involvement from a number of other participants in this resource request workflow process. Okay. All right, being mindful of time and the fact that everyone's been so nice and sticking through such a long day and lots of great presentations, I'll move forward a little more quickly. So those are the resource request workflow updates. Another feature area of the product that is very, very heavily used, so we get a ton of feedback on this. We know from telemetry that this is very, very heavily used, which is our bulk project allocation Flatgrid interface. This is used, again, very heavily. It's a key differentiator, allowing users to create new assignments, plan in bulk, get real-time heat mapping, see or make edits concurrently with other users in bulk. So we don't have to go project by project to update our forecast. We can do everything in one screen, again, without stepping on others' toes and without having to go project by project. The updates here, and there's both a number of them in 5.1 and a number of them coming as well in 5.2, which we'll talk about in a bit, that are very, again, end user driven. We didn't think we'd get them all in, but we did. So you'll see the first three are all really just usability items. So we've added a column total. So a column total lets me see a sum across each individual row. We've added additional options in how the scroll will perform. So the row total, if inserted, will now freeze when you're scrolling vertically, and the task column will now freeze when you scroll horizontally. Lastly, and this is a really big add that's been asked for quite some time that we introduced in 5.1, is the ability to insert project and resource attributes. These are inserted read-only, but they're available for sorting and filtering inside of the BPA Flatgrid. So let's jump back to Tempus. And again, if you're unfamiliar, BPA Flatgrid is here. It's one of the two bulk planning interfaces. And actually, to keep things smooth, I'm going to log back out and log in as the other user where I have things set up. There we go. Okay, so over to bulk project allocation Flatgrid. And again, most of you are familiar, I'm sure. This allows us to pull together various time frames, different modes of entry and edit, various projects and resources, concurrent editing, real-time heat mapping. First thing you'll notice while I have it up is there is a scroll, a horizontal scroll, and you'll notice we now allow you to essentially, or the default is to lock by task. Previously it was project. So you would see resource and project, and then you'd lose context of the task. Now, starting in 5.1, the task remains sticky inside the view. Some of you are actually hiding the task column, in which case this really doesn't apply, because then you would see resource and project, but not task. For everyone else, you'll see all three, and then as you scroll, all three will remain fixed. All right. Now, along the same lines, under options, of course, we've had the total row quite some time, but something that we were missing was as we scroll vertically, you would lose context of the total. Well, that has also been corrected. So if the total row has been inserted, as you scroll vertically, you don't lose context of that total row. Right? So another usability enhancement. Also, we've introduced a show total column, so this can now be inserted. So for not all of the measures, but for a number of them, you will get a total here for each individual row, which gives you, again, a total of the records for that individual row. And then the last feature I'll show you in BPA Flatgrid, again, a really important add, this comes up a ton, is the ability to introduce attributes beyond just assignment attributes and workflow attributes. And this, by the way, that release for approval concept, or that checkpoint for the trigger mode in the resource request workflow, that can be done in bulk. So you can, here's an example, release for approval. If I wanted to release all those workflows from one screen, I could set this to yes, and then just do basically a fill for all those assignments that I want to trigger and go through the approval process. So that can be done in bulk. You don't have to go line by line. But again, going back to our attributes, notice as we scroll through this list, little icons. I have a little icon that looks like a little person. Those are obviously resource-centric attributes. Maybe you want to insert the department value, which I don't have set in this particular case. The employment basis, so that's set. No. Or as we scroll through, you'll also notice the folder icon, which is used for projects. So our projects will have a little different icon, looks like folder. And again, you can insert different attributes here as necessary. Once these are added, you can sort by these values. You can also filter. Oh, they are there. They were just, okay, I had generics at the top that didn't have department set. Others do. Or, of course, you can filter using the built-in column filtering options inside of BPA Flatgrid. So a number of updates here and many, many more coming to BPA Flatgrid. Again, since this is a very, very heavily used interface and a key differentiator for data management. Okay, so those are updates on BPA Flatgrid. Now, a few other updates that I kind of grouped together around administration and reporting, and one of them is huge. So it really should have its own slide, but I wanted to consolidate things and not kill you with tons of slides. And that first one is field level security. So this is a really huge add. This lets you introduce additional security rights or entitlements to individual custom attributes. What does that mean? First, it means that all of your existing security still plays a role. You don't have to change anything. There's no new reconfiguration of your security required. This is sort of an add-on of additional security filtering based on your existing security infrastructure. This means I can add new rights, where if a user has rights to a field, I can now say, well, only these people can actually edit the field, but you can retain your view rights. And you could selectively set the security on a field-by-field level basis. So we'll jump to this in a moment. The second item here is bulk impersonation. Those of you that are using the resource request workflow and are setting up backup approvers, those of you using the timesheeting functionality that need to set up backup approvers or backup submitters, you can now do this in bulk. So instead of having to create rules one by one, which can be tedious and time consuming, you can now set up bulk rules in bulk, in mass. Do that with a number of clicks and then generate 10, 20, 100 rules with just, again, one action as opposed to doing it item by item. And then lastly here, and we'll walk through each one of these, we added additional support inside of our pivot grid report writers where we have our heat map or conditional formatting. So we extended this to move from beyond just integer values to using precision values inside of the reports. All right, so let's take a look at this. So we'll jump back inside of an instance of Tempus and we'll browse to admin settings. So let's go ahead and release those changes, it's fine. And now under attribute management, notice next to each attribute, we now have a new icon. So it looks like a little person with a shield. So in this particular case, there's project, business, sector. And what I'll do here is I'll click on this icon and this brings up a pop-up from which I can set the users or groups that can view the field, the users and groups that can edit the field. Now, a typical case here might be finance-related attributes, maybe contract setup-related attributes, or even cases where you wanted to introduce updates via the API only. So for those of you that in the past have used the toggle inside the custom attributes to disable UI-based edits, or basically locking of the field and then do a bulk insert by opening and closing the field through the API, can now leverage this assignment, or excuse me, attribute level security to allow just the API to make updates to the field. And you could simplify the code around it. So there's a number of updates here, number of downstream impacts that be quite beneficial to end users and as well as those that have built integrations. So in this case, if we wanted to take project, business, sector and make it editable to only specific users, we can disable everyone having rights. And that everyone means whoever's been given rights as a result of all the existing security. It doesn't mean, again, that any security rights have changed. It just means anyone that already had rights to it can still have it. But now what we'll do is further refine that editing rights, those editing rights, to maybe just specific users. Maybe Beverly Lewis and George Reed. Or we can use groups. In this case, again, I'll select administrators so they all have rights. And then save. Right? Once implemented, the icon color coding will change, and that'll now flow throughout the interfaces, both inside the PM and RM grids, as well as other interfaces where those fields are present for edit and for view. Okay, so that's a really, really big update. Lots of benefit there. Bulk impersonation, the next that I'll take you to. Again, if you remember, impersonation is defined underneath access management under the admin console, and that's here. In the past, when you created a new rule, you would select create, and you would choose one impersonator and one resource being impersonated, and you'd set your time frame. Starting in 5.1, we can now choose create, select the impersonator, and we can say that maybe Joyce will be the impersonator. And now we can choose who will Joyce impersonate. This is where we can basically select everyone in the entire company. So if you had a rule like that, and it's not totally uncommon, where maybe one person is just administratively going to be a backup for everyone, maybe your sort of PMO lead, PMO backup, whomever, and I can now choose one or multiple users here. I can also search at the top of the screen. So we'll create, in this case, 6 or so various connections or impersonation rules. Again, we would define our time range, maybe this month until the end of the year. And now we would choose, again, what rights they have. These users, let's say, are going to be those that can approve timesheets and maybe also submit them, Joyce, on behalf of these others, and select create. Well, now notice we've generated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rules with just essentially one operation versus having to go and create Joyce for Allison, Joyce for Amy, Joyce for Carolyn. Again, we do it all with one operation versus doing it one by one. All right, so massively beneficial for those administering Tempus. Again, another very much real-world type of adjustment or enhancement to the product. Next, while I'm here, let's jump over to report management. So this gets back to the conditional formatting inside of a report. So in this case, I already have a report built called Resource Heat Map by Title. And this is where I've basically grouped resources by title. I have my time frame and my columns. And as I drill down, you'll see the various color coding illuminating. And you'll also notice these are all, of course, precision numbers. They're not integer values. You'll notice the color gradients changing within the precision number, various strata. Well, if we go into the report definition by selecting Edit, we've expanded this functionality beyond what was there in 5.0. And you'll now notice Report Pivot Grid Heat Map now fully supports precision number values. So again, little minor thing, but again, something that was widely and heavily impactful to a number of folks that were looking to create more heat map style reports and apply more conditional formatting, especially on calculated measures or where ratios are utilized, or generally wherever precision number values were the output inside of a report. All right, moving on. So administration and reporting. Okay, so just when we thought we'd get simple, we get more really big features. So another really, really big add, and this one has come up quite a bit, is introducing a Kanban view. Now, I personally thought, well, how is this going to be used? Why are users going to think this is so valuable? I don't get it. Well, I've been converted. Like the minute it launched, I immediately switched to using it. It's massively valuable, whether you're looking at projects by, time frame, release schedule, area of the business. We use this internally. In fact, I'm going to take you to this when we talk about the futures of Tempus in a little bit to show you certain investment areas where I've moved some data that's not heavily proprietary. But again, a Kanban view that's been added. Now, this is really a portfolio level Kanban. This is not inside of your project. This is not a DevOps style, here's the team, here's a specific task. This is portfolio level. But all of the richly formatted capabilities you'd expect, being able to move items between swim lanes, between columns, card formatting, board formatting. There's a lot of it. There's also advanced security. You can choose who can view and who can interact with the Kanban view. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. We've added some other options here, simple things or less, a bit smaller. One of them is if you're aware of the option to copy data set information between the demand and allocation and vice versa. We added some flags to turn that option off. That was a hindrance for some clients. We've also added some illustrations and highlighting in the product to show the current period. You'll see that in the SPA grid. We've added some additional data validation warnings on certain date changes from the PM grid display. And then we've updated cloning security. So when we do cloning now, the end user doesn't have to have rights to create new projects, which was an impediment for a number of clients who really wanted to strictly isolate how users could actually create new projects and didn't want to give them rights to create brand new. They wanted them to start from templates or sort of parametrically start from existing projects. Okay, so let's jump into Tempus. And the first place I'll take you, obviously, since it's so cool, is the project management screen. And we actually have another view shipping in 5.2, but I'll wait to talk about that in a bit. So this is our conventional grid view. And actually, before I switch to Kanban, I'll quickly talk about a few features here. One of them is, in the event that we're looking to change a date, a user with rights or without, if they don't have rights, it's not a problem. But if users have rights to change dates, you could run into scenarios where someone tries to change a date and they could truncate certain records in that project. So we've added more functionality here, more validation to warn you, hey, data loss is possible. And the default option here is cancel versus the default being, oh yeah, that's fine. So just again, not worry about people having the ability to do this or at least have warnings. We've now made the cancel the default. That's pretty straightforward. Now on the matter of cloning, so if you're unaware, we've had this clone function in the product for a bit. But the security required to do this also required that the end user have rights to create new projects. We've now removed that coupling. So end users now can create clones of projects, templates, or existing projects they have rights to, without having rights to create brand new projects. What does that mean? It means the end user can't just go here and create something from scratch. It would give them rights to clone without having this right to start again from scratch. So this is more of a process-heavy type of requirement. So this has been added. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still correlated security settings that are necessary. But one that we have removed that was most impairing, if you will, I guess, is this create project dependency. Right, so we've made that update as well. Now, over to Kanban. So notice now we have a new option directly to the left of the grid view, which is called Kanban. Here's my default Kanban that I can build on my own or share with others. You'll notice in this case, I have my various columns as sort of project stages: prospect, proposal, active, on hold, archive. And then I have my swim lanes as areas of the business: asset management, consulting, construction, and so on. Right. Now you'll also notice inside of this, I have various, and this is all just sample made up data here. There's nothing that's really real. Again, you can interact with these data. You can drag and drop between the various columns if you wish to do so, all right? So you can move these things around. That'll update the underlying data. And you can move between both the columns and between the swim lanes as necessary. You can make your views default. You can lock them so they can't be manipulated. If you go to your board settings or create a new storyboard, you'll notice options to set your board name. And then you have 3 tabs here to configure your Kanban view. One of them is the board layout, the other is the card layout, and the third being permissions. This is something we'll start bringing to the other view capabilities in the product, but at the moment it's only available in Kanban. So looking at the board layout, you can choose your columns using any of your project-centric custom fields. So perhaps something like maybe you want to group by project health. And then what are the values of project health that we want to introduce? Maybe there's red, yellow, green. All right, so those have now been introduced. You can choose their ordering. Perhaps you want green to the far left, and then you want yellow and then red. So we can change this layout here. So green, yellow, red. You can then choose the swim lanes, which you don't have to have, but you might want to group them by maybe the current phase. And then a lot of options around if you want to enable swim lane drag and drop. Show empty swim lanes, show swim lane item count, how we're sorting. So those are our board layout options. Card layout, you can choose attributes to display, perhaps the client, the contracting entity, PMO comments, execution office, any of the attributes you've created, project director, and we could certainly add more. You can add up to 3 inside the card itself, maybe project health as well. And then you can choose how card color coding is performed, perhaps, again, by the phase of the project, by really any of the attributes. So if we chose maybe project health, and you have red, yellow, green. This is pretty close. So how about green will be green, and yellow is going to be maybe this yellowish color as well. And then lastly, we have permissions. This gives you options to choose who can view and who can edit this individual Kanban view. So you can make this view more widely available on your own by sharing it, as opposed to having each user need to create their own, right? And then you'd simply select save. So really simple to create these Kanban views, and exceptionally useful and very usable and easy to work with. And there'll be more enhancements coming to this as well. We already have customers on 5.1 giving us feedback. For example, editing the attributes by double clicking and then drilling down to the project. Those things are coming right now. It's mostly view and then manipulation by dragging and dropping between the various sections. All right. Two other quick things while I'm here to show you. Let's drill down into a project. Let's go to one that's a bit newer. So let's go to, how about Laguna Phase 4. So this new feature here is the ability to see the current time frame. So we've added some color coding here to more easily tell. Now, when you're in quarter, month, or week mode, it's going to tell you that's the current time period. But when we switch down to day, it'll give you the actual current day, and we'll say today. All right, so that's also been added. This icon that I mentioned earlier in the notes, this is something that you can turn on or off now. This is that copy data set information. So if you're using both data sets and you have rights to the target data set, meaning the opposite, this little icon will appear, which allows you to move the data into the other data set. And it facilitates a number of sort of unique scenarios. Perhaps you're starting with the demand data set early on in the forecasting process, then you're evolving in terms of how the project is operating and its approval process to now where you've gone to the allocation data set. You want to simply copy the data and then manipulate. So that's really what it's there for, and it facilitates those types of scenarios. Again, you can now hide that icon underneath your general settings. Okay, so we've talked about some of the PM views. Scheduling. So I'll talk about this briefly. If you're unaware, in 5.0, we did introduce a full critical path scheduling set of functionality. I won't cover these in too much detail, just given the timing, because I do want to get to futures and still be respectful of your time. It's no longer in beta mode. We've added a number of enhancements here along stability, re-indexing, color coding, label updates, and we'll continually add to this functionality. I think a number of presenters today show you screen captures of this scheduling functionality. This is, again, designed to augment the existing forecasting capabilities of the product. It doesn't take us off of our core principles of what the product's built on. It's just the realities of many of our customers, especially as we've gone through this huge growth cycle, is, hey, we want to take a number of users off of their desktop scheduling tool sets and put them in Tempus. Or there's projects that go from demand to allocation and then ultimately into execution, where we then want to build out a waterfall type schedule. We don't want to use it for forecasting and planning or for time sheeting, but we want to know the timing of various activities. We want lead and lag time. We want to know additional milestones along a Gantt style view. So this gives you additional flexibility in how you forecast, plan, and introduce more users to Tempus. So we've made some updates on the scheduling functionality. Those of you that integrate Tempus with other systems, utilize the API, a number of updates, 3 of which are pretty big. The third one in this case is huge. And we'll continue to make updates on the API, which, again, you've heard from other speakers, is quite robust and used very heavily. The first is the ability to get all resource request data. Those of you that are tying Tempus in with other systems or other reporting vehicles, whether it's through our exporter product, where you might be pushing data to a warehouse or on your own, writing it into a warehouse that might, again, be peered into via another reporting solution, this get all resource request functionality lets you do that. There's a built-in view in Tempus that lets you view all resource requests. We now have it essentially available programmatically. So you can retrieve all of the resource request data and use that in your reporting externally or for other purposes. We also added, along the same lines, the ability to programmatically interact with the resource request workflow. The interactions you could take would be approve, reject, and delegate. Obviously, inside of Tempus, you can do the same, but you can also conduct a negotiated response. So approve, reject, and delegate are all now part of the API. So we've added endpoints there where, again, if you wanted to leverage a third-party tool set, write your own custom app, build some kind of iOS app that can do this stuff, it's totally up to you. We see all sorts of wild stuff getting created. But now through the API, you can conduct those resource request workflow actions. The third item here is API dataset merge. It sounds innocuous, sounds pretty boring. And yes, I guess its face value is, but it's massively valuable both for performance as well as for the flexibility for those writing integrations. In the past, if you did an update to an assignment inside of Tempus, so the assignment is there, but you now wanted to make an update to it, you had to update the entire data set. So for that particular assignment. So imagine an assignment spanned 2020 to 2025. It's a 5-year-long research activity, and you wanted to update one individual day, one individual month or week. Well, you had to pass in the entire array. Now, not only is that complex and you're pushing in more than you'd like to, it's also could be a performance hindrance, as you can expect. You're just passing in more information than is necessary. Well, with dataset merge, it's very similar to, and this might be oversimplifying a bit, but that's okay. It's very similar to the Excel merge, where if I'm updating just a specific day or week or month, I can do that programmatically for that section of the overall array. I don't have to pass in all 5 years. I could pass in just the records for that contiguous time frame I'm updating. So I can pass in just the update for January of 2021 versus all months, all years of that assignment. This is really, really big for those doing integrations and updating records inside of Tempus. All right. Coming in the home stretch here. So the last section, and there's also been updates on our integrations capabilities. We've added some integrations with some more tools. We've added more filters and functionality on our integrations, but I'm not going to spend much time on those. We can talk about them separately, or you can access them, the release notes separately. What we have done here with Excel import is made a number of critical updates. So those of you that are moving onto the platform, just getting started, those of you that have processes whereby you continuously update Tempus with Excel, those of you that are integrators or implementation specialists, this will be really, really valuable. A number of these updates will be quite helpful in saving you a lot of time and giving you more tools in the toolbox when utilizing Tempus. The first of them is setting security groups. So in the past, we did not allow you to set project or resource security groups. Now the groups still have to exist, but now we can set those values through an Excel update or upload of project data or resource data. So both now include the ability to leverage that column. We've also added an ability for the assignment import. Actually, the next three are all assignment centric. The ability to insert zeros. Now, in the past, if it was a contiguous array and somewhere in between starting and ending point you had zeros, we could handle that. But if you wanted to simply say if the next 6 months, and I'm only showing the next 6 months, those are all zeros. We skipped that assignment, basically saying, hey, the update is null, we won't accept it. Well, now we do. So it's a helpful way now. If you had to clear data for just a specific time frame, you can now do that by inserting zeros in the assignment import, the task import. We've also added a new column called action inside of the assignment import template. Right now, the only action we support is delete. The benefit of this is, again, if you wanted to clear a data set for a specific assignment, you don't have to fill out the time phase data. You don't have to specify the time period or the allocation type. You could simply say, I want to delete that record. You can now do a mass delete or a limited delete using this new function, this new action function inside of the assignment import. All right. And then we've also added, this one is like my personal favorite with Excel, is auto expand project start and end date. So I can't tell you the number of clients, the number of those that go down our pre-sales process that are just getting started. And this also underscores why Excel is just terrible. And Excel-like tools, if you get my drift, are terrible at doing this work, is because here's the typical case. Clients will send to us, or they'll do an import, and their project dates, their start and end dates will show, let's say, one example might be the project starts January of 2020 and ends December of 2020. So it's a year-long project. Okay, that's great. That gets imported. Perfect. Now we go to insert or upload the assignment data. Again, they're tracking an Excel or some other Excel-like tool. Well, there's no governance in those types of tools. So the time series data might show the allocation data started in 2015, and the actuals or the plan data go until 2025. Well, now both the start and or end dates are violated. So Tempus goes, that doesn't make any sense. You told us that it was 2020 make span, but you're giving us data over a 5-year window, and that's extreme. Or maybe, it violates just the start date or just the end date. So what we generally would have to do, we had a number of Excel tools, or customers would write their own to kind of figure out where that was a problem. Well, starting in 5.1, you now have a new flag inside of the import of assignment data that says Tempus will auto change the start and end dates of your project to accommodate those messy data that are coming from the Excel or Excel-like tools, and will update those dates for you. So massively useful, even like personally, this is a huge time saver for me when I'm assisting one of our team members or even in a pre-sales case. All right, so let me jump over to Tempus and I'll quickly illuminate those. So again, these Excel import related functions, of course, are under data synchronization, and you'll see them specifically under the Excel tile, which again, you're all familiar with. Now the updates in this particular slide cover import resource, import project, and import assignments. While we're on import assignments, notice this new option here, auto adjust project date for assignment. It's off by default, but if we enable it, when you bring over those Excel data that totally violate the roll-up data, it'll auto adjust these start and end dates to accommodate, frankly, the deficiencies of doing this in Excel, which is perfect. So this will now adjust for you. So massively helpful. Now to illuminate the other updates here, what I've got inside of this other tab, let's go here, is Excel, again, opened with multiple tabs. And you'll notice first, there's an example of the resource import file. We now have a new column called security group. This again lets you set, you don't have to set, but it lets you set security groups for your resources. The same goes for projects. There's a new column here for security group, so you can set security groups for projects. Again, the value does have to exist already. Remember, those are set administratively underneath your global configuration. So if we go back to Tempus, go back here to, let's go back to admin section, the project security group and resource security group, those values have to exist first, and they can then be leveraged here. Obviously, if the value used here doesn't exist, it's going to skip that update. Okay. Also, clearing. There's a case where we now have this action column, which is where we can now leverage delete. So this is a new function inside of the Excel import. This gives us, again, the ability to clear an assignment. Project A, Megan, architecture review. I don't have to tell you the data input. I don't have to tell you the allocation type, plan or actual. I don't have to tell you the time frame. I'm telling you to delete it, which means that either the allocation or demand, I would have to tell you that, gets cleared. I don't have to specify anything else. So really, really valuable there. That one comes up quite a bit on our support side. And then the last feature is inserting of zeros. Now, again, something like this right here has always been supported. 80, 80, 80, 0, 0, 120. It was a contiguous entry where we had sort of zeros inside of the array, which is okay because it said you've got a start, you got an end, looks good. What we didn't support would be these two highlighted scenarios where I'm saying for this entire window of time, from 1/1/2020 to 5/30/2020, clear, basically zero out those data. This is now supported. The same here. So this entire array that we're working with, even though it's a merge operation most likely, insert that entire array of values, which would be zeros. Right, so all really, really helpful things. Okay, so that's been our deep dive into 5.1. What I'd like to spend just a few minutes covering, and I know I hit my time frame, but I think it's worth it, is really looking at futures. So along with everything that you might be aware of that we're working on, there are also some huge parallel investments beyond, again, what's seen publicly. And this is probably impossible to see, so I'm actually going to take you to an instance of Tempus where I've inserted some of these items so you can see more around this futures roadmap. Now, some of these things are known, some are not, but we'll certainly call them out. Let me take you to this Kanban style view, and let's maybe collapse some of these sections. All right, now this is roadmap stuff. It's always subject to change, but the things you're seeing in Q3 are pretty much baked, and those will certainly be there. Now, these are mostly higher level items. We're not focusing on really, very detailed, smaller items. So if you're a customer that we've talked to, or you've submitted an item and you don't see it, don't worry, don't be concerned. You can always reach out to us. We have it in backlog. This is not our backlog. These are just specific items we're calling out. So I've laid these out, again, using Tempus Kanban. And let me zoom in maybe a little bit here. This a little bit. There we go. So here's Q3 2020, and I have these grouped into generically certain investment areas. We have advanced insight, core Tempus, RPM, this is our key stuff, resource portfolio management, strategic decision-making, and workflow and automation. So Q3, some things, actually, let's close that. Those are more Q4. So some core Tempus items you'll notice in Q3. We'll be introducing options for admin time import and admin time reporting and admin time API interaction. We'll be rolling out report folders. That's another pretty big one that comes up quite a bit. Looking out to Q4, we'll be rolling out and working with expanding our dashboarding functionality beyond what's there today and investing pretty heavily. There's also a project management Gantt. So where we have the Kanban view and the project grid, there'll be a Gantt style interface. That's likely to land in Q3, but I have it showing here in Q4. Looking at our resource portfolio management, this is really our key bread and butter. This is what we do. As you notice, a number of items here. More functionality around BPA Flatgrid. We'll be introducing views. You can create your own views inside of BPA Flatgrid, so you can create multiple views. We have a Federal Energy Regulatory Committee planning grid. So this is for a number of customers in that power generation space where we've been quite successful. So there's a specific grid that'll allow you to input and manage against capitalization rates. This is another unique grid, really isolated for just those scenarios. More field availability in the resource request approval grid. So you'll be able to view project and resource custom fields, just like we had the ability to do inside of the BPA Flatgrid. We'll be expanding the ability to input planned actual remaining inside of BPA Flatgrid beyond current capabilities. And then we'll be pretty significantly expanding upon the resource replacement grid in the SPA view. So right now it's kind of an all or nothing replacement. We'll be introducing more contouring, very similar to the resource request workflow grid when doing replacements at the SPA level. On the strategic decision-making side of things, this one we're all really looking forward to. This is an advanced portfolio construction analytic. So this will be very closely tied inside of Tempus What If. This will give you the ability to essentially build multiple RAR reports. So those shale, heat, stacked bar, mountain chart style reports, and essentially see the effect of introducing multiple projects and see where do you start to breach capacity on critical resources or non-critical resources. Other tools out there have called these types of things above the line, below the line. Ours is going to be substantially more sophisticated and capable, and of course will tie in with our entire what if analysis stack of capabilities. So this is going to be a huge release, a huge capability that we'll have in Q3. Workflow and automation, let's go back to that. So those are some of the big items for Q3. Looking out to Q4 and beyond, advanced insight. So these are some big investment areas for us. You'll see more things around AI coming out. So very similar to what Lloyd had mentioned, what Eric had mentioned, and also what Donna spoke to, especially what Donna was talking about around AI and machine learning really being there to augment people and make you more productive, not to be the Star Trek type of tool that just suddenly changes your whole world. These are things to identify, where do you have additional opportunities beyond what you might not know of today? Where do data not match what you've planned in the past? So very parametrically driven around who's planning and the type of project. So more AI type assistance. Also around things like where are fields missing? Where are fields not set correctly? Again, and really this earlier release of AI type assistance is going to be around data cleanup and helping you avoid having to spend more of your time doing the basic blocking and tackling, and focus on using the insight gained from Tempus. So AI work both in Q4 and in Q1 of 2021, and that'll expand out. We'll also be expanding on Tempus's what if assignment actions, doing more things like canceling, bulk replacing inside of the what if analysis. We'll be looking to do more on the what if project drill down, so doing things like some of the things we had in the Silverlight edition, splitting projects, changing assignments, moving phases and stages of the what if level versus some of the more high level actions. And then you'll see more things Q1 around portfolio velocity. So things more of a predictive analytic, especially tied to more heavily around some of the Kanban portfolio planning to see what goes in, what goes out, and then help people better understand kind of what can those WIP limits really handle. So we'll be seeing more of that. Core Tempus stuff, there's so much here, but I just want to put some big ones in for Q4. Expanded dashboarding, and of course that PM Gantt. If we look at our RPM functionality, Q4 stuff, we'll be looking more at resource request, editing of requests by the approving manager, more security around actual and plan data, and then likely some refactoring around the SPA grid itself. So making it more or almost identical to what you'd have inside of the BPA Flatgrid, like assignment, custom field insertion, essentially more flexibility inside of the individual project planning grid, similar again to what you'd see in BPA Flatgrid. Onto strategic decision making, and again, we're limiting a lot of what's displayed here, but integrated road mapping. So Tempus fits, and many of our clients are asking for this, and I think the key advisors of the company are also pushing for this pretty heavily, and it makes a lot of sense. Our customers are taking early stage investments and walking through a planning process from the resourcing side and increasingly from the financial side. We need to be focused more heavily on introducing more road mapping type of functionality and road mapping type of communication. Again, fits very closely in how resource forecasting is done, whether it's IT, product development, R&D. So again, fits very closely in the core capabilities and product. And a number of other areas, or one other area that I'll talk about is workflow and automation, and then we can wrap up here. There's a big effort. I think some of you have seen it. It's being used right now for integrations and for automation. Is our new product we're working on called the Tempus Orchestrator. This will be used to allow you to build really any type of triggered workflow, and it will also play a role in more demand management or portfolio level workflow capability that you'll see later in the year and into Q1. And that also ties into more dynamic forms and lists. That might also leverage some of the Tempus Sheets functionality that many of you are using today as well. So a number of investment areas. Again, the key piece here is resource portfolio management. We'll continue to pour investment dollars into that. And then some of these other tangential areas that are critical to doing this the right way. And I think this aligns with what many of our speakers have mentioned, as ongoing points of value, we can help them drive more benefit to their business over time. All right. So that being said, thank you everyone for attending. Again, presenters and attendees, we really greatly appreciate your participation. We greatly appreciate your participation in the community, being customers. If there's anything we do for you, please let us know. But that's my presentation. Thank you.